Alrighty, today's video is on cells. So let's get started. What are cells? Cells are the smallest unit that can carry on all of life's processes. They are quite unique. They're also very, very tiny. We can't see them without the help of a microscope. If you take a picture or look at your hand, you know you are made up of billions of cells. You just can't see them because they are so small. There's basically two different types of cells. They're prokaryotic or eukaryotic cells, and the way I kind of like to remember it is prokaryotic cells are very simple. Just like an apartment or a home, they provide everything you need to do for life, just in a very simple manner. It has like a kitchen, a bathroom, somewhere to sleep. A eukaryotic cell is just like a large city. It has all those same things. They have places you can eat, places you can get food, places for you to sleep. It's just on a large scale and much more complex. Let's take a peek at these prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. The cell on the left is a prokaryotic cell. As you can see, it's not a lot to it, whereas the cell on the right is a eukaryotic cell, chock full of all organelles. What do these two cells have in common? They both have a cell membrane, or also known as a plasma membrane. They both have cytoplasm, DNA, and they both have ribosomes. Let's look at a prokaryotic cell. They are also what you would commonly call them as bacteria cells. So if you've ever had a strep throat or E. coli or salmonella, those are all bacteria cells. And they're so small that they can actually fit inside of our cells. What are they made up of? They have a cell wall, a plasma membrane, DNA, cytoplasm, and ribosomes, as we said before. What they don't have is what makes them unique, is they don't have a nucleus. Their DNA is free floating inside the cytoplasm. This makes it very easy for them to replicate and reproduce, and it happens rather quickly. So that's what makes them so simple. Again, an example of a prokaryotic cell is your bacteria. A eukaryotic cell, on the other hand, very large, very complex. And what makes it so unique is it has a nucleus. And inside the nucleus is where the DNA is located. So the biggest difference between a prokaryotic cell and a eukaryotic cell is eukaryotic cells have nucleuses and many organelles, therefore making them very complex. Eukaryotic cells come in two different kinds, an animal cell and a plant cell. But first, let's recap the differences between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells have no nucleus, so think no nucleus in the prokaryotic cells. They're very small, and they're very simple in structure. Eukaryotic cells, you're made up of one, and you have a nucleus, so nucleus. They're very large and complex and have many organelles. And again, don't forget, they both share a plasma membrane, cytoplasm, ribosomes, and DNA. So next, we're going to take a peek at all those many organelles that make up eukaryotic cells. And here's a picture of a cell that has all the different types of organelles. We're fortunately only going to look at 9 of them and try and memorize what they do and understand their basic function inside of a cell. So let's get started. We're going to work from the outside all the way in of the cell. So the plasma membrane is the outside layer of the cell, and it's going to decide what enters and leaves the cell. It's very important so that it can help the cell maintain homeostasis. The cytoplasm is what's next, would be the space in which all the organelles are kept. It's made up of salts and minerals and organic molecules. If you remember, that would be anything that contains carbon, so that's carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. Next organelle is the nucleus, very important because it is where the DNA is located, and that means it's the storing of our genetic information. Again, that's very different than prokaryotic cells. All eukaryotic cells have a nucleus that holds their genetic information. Ribosomes are up next. They make proteins. They're the little tiny structures that are scattered all throughout the cell and attached to the endoplasmic reticulum. And if you remember, proteins are very complex organic molecules that do an awful lot for us. Mitochondria is up next. You may have remembered the mitochondria, from middle school. is the mighty mitochondria, and it's responsible for making energy in the form of ATP. It's very numerous in certain cells and smaller in other cells. For example, it's very numerous in your muscle cells because there's a high demand for energy and ATP in those, whereas in your stomach cell, there's not as much demand, so there's not as high a number of them in those particular cells. Lysosomes, again, it's another small structure. It's a rounded structure, and they're going to be responsible for breaking down materials like old, worn-out proteins, carbohydrates, or lipids, maybe some viruses and bacteria. I like to remember lysosomes because it reminds me of Lysol, like the spray, which breaks down germs, so lysosomes break things down. Now, the next three organelles are going to be three that are particular to plant cells, and the first one is it's a cell wall, and that is what's going to give the cell its support and structure. It's made up of long chains of cellulose, which you can recognize it's a carbohydrate, and it's a polysaccharide. It's what gives plants the ability to stand up tall. Next is vacuoles, which is the vacuoles where all the water is stored in plants. It's rather large. It can also store enzymes and waste material. Not very often do you see a vacuole in an animal cell, and if you do, they're very small. So vacuoles are pretty much contained to plant cells. The last one here is chloroplasts, and they also supply energy for the plant cells. It's the site of photosynthesis. They're going to take the sun's energy and make glucose. That glucose is then given over to the mitochondria and made into energy. So they make the food for the plant that can be changed over into energy. Lastly, let's look at the biggest difference between an animal and a plant cell. Both are eukaryotic, but an animal cell comes in all different shapes and sizes, and a plant cell comes in a very rigid shape. It's usually boxy or square, and they have three parts that an animal cell does not. It would be a cell wall, chloroplasts, and a centrally located large vacuole. That about does it for cells today. If you have any questions, bring them to class. Thanks.